The story starts when our hero's father arranges his marriage to Archduke Valdrova. His father confidently declares that he surely understands exactly what such a decision means. For Ferda Roznova, hearing about his engagement to the Archduke felt like living through a nightmare. For him to react that way, the woman must have been unbelievably unattractive. Among the nobility, those words were no different from a death sentence, leaving him with only two options. He could reject the marriage and be disowned, or accept it and watch his life fall apart. Yet deep inside, all he truly wanted was to belong to that family and earn their acceptance. The servants constantly ridiculed him for training, despite having no talent, calling him weak, sickly, and pathetic. Not a single person ever stood up for Ferda, but he silently endured every insult thrown at him. Even with everyone against him, he continued working hard and giving everything he had each day. His eyes were always fixed on his father, hoping to catch even the smallest sign of pride or acknowledgement. More than anything, he simply wanted to be recognized and valued by his own family until one of his brothers arrived to mock him, asking if he had gone insane for trying to train. Ferda was quickly defeated and left lying on the ground in humiliation while being told he never had the right to dream of becoming a knight. To make things even worse, they branded him a filthy outcast. All he had ever wanted was to be accepted by his family. But when he looked toward the window, he saw the painful truth. His father quietly turned away and walked off without a second glance, proving he did not care about him in the slightest. At that moment, Ferda realized everyone in that household had abandoned him long ago. Back inside the office, he gathered all his courage and informed his father that he had chosen to leave the family forever. His father simply looked at him with icy, emotionless eyes, showing neither concern nor affection. Without hesitation, the man accepted his decision, and before long, Ferda found himself standing outside the mansion gates in the middle of the night. His father even cruelly declared that from that moment onward, he was no longer a member of the Roznova family. Ferda trembled with fury as he remembered that his father had always known how hard he had worked. Overwhelmed by uncontrollable anger, his eyes shone with an overwhelming desire for revenge. He vowed that no matter what happened, he would never forgive his father for everything he had done. At that very instant, a mysterious crimson magic circle appeared beneath him. Driven by those intense emotions, he swore to make his father regret abandoning him, awakening as a mage on that very day. At just 18 years old, Ferda had finally awakened his magical powers. However, the other apprentices mocked him as he lay on the ground, saying he was far too old to become a mage. They laughed and questioned whether he was even smart enough to understand magic. While everyone else relied on internal energy as their foundation, Ferda ignored every insult and unleashed an overwhelming amount of mana that left the boys frozen in terror. As a crimson circle formed beneath him, he revealed that his mana was fueled entirely by his hatred and burning desire for revenge. Overflowing with that dark power, the young man unleashed a massive explosion that shook the entire area. Ferda soon realized that the more he hated someone, the stronger his magic became. After reaching the sixth circle of magic through his hatred alone, the only thing left for him to do was return to the Roznova mansion. He used his newfound powers to force the servants who had once humiliated him to destroy themselves without a shred of mercy. After that, Ferda turned his two older brothers against each other, filling them with overwhelming hatred. He stood back and watched as they fought, until they completely destroyed one another on the ground. At last, he confronted his father, the man he despised above everyone else, who desperately begged for his suffering to end. Ferda told his father to take one final look at the ruins of the proud Roznova family that he had built with his own hands. The man completely lost his sanity as that horrifying scene unfolded before his eyes. With that, everything connected to the Roznova family disappeared from the world forever. Even so, that revenge was still not enough to satisfy the emptiness in his heart. Many influential and powerful figures united, drawing their swords to stop him at any cost. They surrounded him and declared him the greatest enemy on the entire continent, vowing to bring him to justice. But once again, he survived and advanced to the 8th circle of magic, the highest level any human could possibly reach. Ferda became an archmage, fully aware that countless people still hated him and would eventually seek revenge. Because of that, he knew he had to reach the 9th circle, the realm of a demigod, to gain absolute power. After searching through countless ancient books, he finally discovered the last ingredient needed to achieve it. The moment he read the final page, he wondered if fate itself was mocking him. The final ingredient he desperately required was the heart of the red dragon. Archduke Valdova. The dragon remarks that fate truly enjoys playing cruel and ironic games. She finds it unbelievable that the very man she had once been meant to marry had now appeared before her, intending to take her life. Ferda spits out blood and grits his teeth, visibly exhausted after the fierce battle. Staring at the tyrant Valda, the young man tells her to accept her fate and end it already. The dragon calmly says she knows people call her a tyrant, but asks why he harbors so much hatred toward her. She explains that she has always lived in isolation, far away from everyone, and never understood why humans despised her so deeply. Furious, Ferda demands to know if she truly believes she had done nothing wrong to him. He screams that her obsession with finding a human groom was the very reason he had been cast out by his own family. The creature looks at him in confusion and asks if that was really her fault, and Ferda answers with absolute certainty that it was. He bitterly declares that the selfish desire of a dragon seeking a human partner completely ruined his life. After hearing everything, the dragon quietly says that she finally understands what truly happened. Faced with such a calm reaction, Ferda grows suspicious, unable to understand what she is thinking, but he chooses to ignore it since the brief pause gives him enough time to gather more mana. The dragon suddenly prepares to attack and lunges at the MC with her massive claw. Startled, Ferda quickly raises a magical barrier to defend himself. A devastating blow lands and blood begins to run down the MC's face, but to his shock, it is actually the dragon's blood as she tears open her own chest with her claws. Ferda is left completely horrified and confused, unable to understand why she is deliberately hurting herself like that. She then asks whether his magic truly requires a dragon's heart to reach its full potential. Alarmed, Ferda realizes she intends to tear open her own chest and immediately shouts for her to stop. Slowly but surely, she continues ripping her chest apart. Ferda races against time to stop her because that heart is his only chance to evolve his magic. He quickly casts a spell in an attempt to stop her. The attack lands directly on target, causing the enormous dragon to stagger backward from the impact. Ferda screams in panic as he watches her claws continue digging into her chest. When the dragon finally collapses, the young man desperately wonders what could have happened to the precious heart. He sharpens his focus and notices the reflection of a brilliant golden glow shining in his own eyes. To Ferda's immense relief, the priceless dragon heart remains completely intact before him. The creature calmly tells him to take it, leaving the young man utterly confused by her actions. He asks why she would do such a thing when she could have simply continued fighting and defeated him. She quietly reveals that she chose to do it because she realized her very existence had only brought him suffering. Poor dragoness. I genuinely felt sorry for her. The dragon begins recalling her lonely and painful past, buried deep within her memories. Valdova confesses that she had always hated herself and the violent blood flowing through her veins. She despised the uncontrollable instinct that drove her to destroy everything without reason. That monstrous side of herself was something she could never accept. In the past, whenever she assumed a human form, her presence brought fear and chaos wherever she went. She understood better than anyone that her mere existence was enough to terrify everyone around her. She regrets ever dreaming of happiness, knowing that her selfish wish ended up bringing suffering to countless people. A single sincere tear falls from the enormous eye of the defeated dragon as she lies in the darkness. Since everyone suffered because of her, she hopes Ferda can finally find happiness through her sacrifice. With those final words, the gigantic creature slowly fades away and falls lifeless onto the dark ground. Ferda suddenly feels a strange pain tightening in his chest and wonders what that unfamiliar feeling is. The young man grows irritated that the victory he had longed for leaves such a bitter taste behind. He shouts in frustration, convinced that the dragon tried to toy with his emotions until her very last breath. Ferda forces himself to focus on his true objective, remembering that the ninth circle is now within his reach. He raises the glowing dragon heart, ready to obtain absolute power at last. Ferda believes that if he absorbs its full power all at once, he will finally surpass the limits of humanity itself and be reborn into this world as a powerful and feared demigod. A massive explosion of light and dust violently engulfs the entire area. Suddenly, everything around him changes, and he finds himself floating naked within an endless dark void. Ferda wonders what is happening since he had absorbed the dragon heart perfectly. Yet the sensation filling his body feels as though he is sinking deeper and deeper into a bottomless swamp. He begins to wonder if this endless descent is simply a side effect of absorbing the dragon heart. At that very moment, an overwhelming and uncontrollable flood of someone else's emotions crashes into his mind. A powerful bolt of magical lightning suddenly strikes the young man's head in the middle of the endless darkness. At that moment, Ferda realizes in complete shock that those memories and emotions actually belong to Valdrova. He finally sees the truth and understands what had always been hidden inside the creature's heart. He witnesses an ancient despair so deep that it makes his own suffering seem insignificant, yet alongside it exists an incredibly gentle loneliness. Ferda realizes that all the anger and hatred that had driven him to hunt her down were painfully insignificant, and with tears in his eyes, he wonders what he had truly done. The young man questions what he had really wanted all along, to become an archmage, take revenge, or ascend into a demigod. At that moment, he remembers himself as a small child, quietly drawing alone at a table. He realizes the answer had always been a clear no. All he had ever wanted was to draw his family together on a single piece of paper and be accepted by them. His one true wish had always been to build a simple family and live peacefully. Thinking back to Valdrova in her human form, he sadly wonders if she had shared that very same dream. The mage realizes that his entire pursuit of power and revenge had been completely meaningless. The dragoness was already dead by his own hands, leaving his greatest achievement utterly hollow. Genuine tears of regret begin streaming down the young mage's face. He remembers that the only spell a ninth circle mage can cast is the wish spell. Even believing that everything has become meaningless, Ferda decides to cast the ultimate magic within the glowing circle. Suddenly, he hears a familiar voice calling his name and opens his eyes in surprise. Looking around, he realizes he is once again inside the luxurious office of his family's mansion. Standing before him is his father, Aranol Roznova, scolding him for losing focus during their conversation. Ferda remembers that this man had gone insane before his death and immediately begins to suspect what day this truly is. His father repeats the exact same words, saying that his arranged marriage to Archduke Valda has already been decided. The man continues, confidently stating that Ferda surely understands what that decision means. His father warns him that if he chooses to reject the engagement to the Archduke, the Roznova family will take action. Ferda steps forward and realizes with overwhelming shock that he has truly traveled back in time. Interrupting his father without hesitation, he firmly declares that he understands everything perfectly. Ferda swears that this time he will not run away and officially announces that he accepts the engagement to Archduke Valda. Hukon Roznova, the family's second son, is completely stunned after hearing that his brother accepted the engagement. Hukon asks the servant if he heard correctly because his brother was never the type to willingly walk toward his own downfall. The butler explains that Ferda is supposed to leave soon, but he dismissed every servant and locked himself inside his room. Hukon lets out a wicked smile and decides to personally visit his younger brother just to mock the desperate expression on his face. Meanwhile, inside his private room, Ferda calmly paces back and forth. Without warning, Hukon kicks the door wide open, shouting as he angrily demands to know why Ferda still hasn't left. But the moment he looks into the room, the older brother freezes in complete shock. He is stunned to find the youngest calmly getting dressed, as he had been certain he would discover him crying in fear. Ferda calmly looks at him and questions his brother's lack of manners for barging into the room without knocking. Seeing Hukon surprised that he is dressing himself, Ferda explains that he dismissed the servants because he wants to get used to taking care of himself. Hukon grows suspicious of such a drastic change and asks if he truly understands what that engagement means. Ferda calmly replies that he understands it perfectly well. It simply means being cast out of the family. Hukon lets out a nervous laugh and says that in reality, he is walking toward his own destruction, asking if he even knows why the position of the dragon's groom is always vacant. With an ice-cold and determined expression, Ferda calmly answers that he already knows everything. In the past, Valdrova's first groom was the Empire's third prince. He was considered the ideal man because of his intelligence and handsome appearance, even giving up his claim to the throne just to accept the engagement. However, only one day after arriving in the dragon's territory, he was found in a miserable state with his eyes completely lifeless. He had been beaten so brutally that he was left lying on the ground on the verge of death. Hukan points at Ferda and asks if he honestly believes he can survive something that even the prince failed to endure. A moment later, he shrugs and says he has no intention of stopping a fool determined to throw himself into the dragon's jaws. Even so, he warns Ferda not to even think about running away, or he will personally cut off his head before Valdrova ever gets the chance. Ferda looks at him with complete disdain and coldly tells his older brother to learn how to control himself. He then throws in Hukan's face that everyone already knows about the lingering looks he keeps giving their eldest brother's wife. Enraged, Hukan immediately tries to lunge at him, but Ferda mockingly reminds him that he should restrain himself. Smiling, he remarks that his face is far too valuable right now to allow even the slightest bruise, especially since the journey to the dragon's territory will be a long one. Ferda calmly says his farewell and walks toward the carriage. The elderly butler begins sobbing into a handkerchief as the young man prepares to leave. Through his tears, the servant says it has been a great honor to serve the young master all these years. Ferda knows those words are nothing but lies, because if serving him had truly been an honor, the butler would never have poisoned his meals. He remembers how, as a child, he believed he had simply been born weak, never realizing that even the servants had been against him. Just recalling those dark memories fills the young man with deep disgust and an overwhelming urge to strangle the butler. Even so, he simply places a hand on the servant's shoulder and thanks him for all his years of hard work. With obvious sarcasm, he comments that it could not have been easy putting up with him for so long. Leaving the butler visibly tense from that remark, Ferda asks him to take good care of his former family in his absence before finally stepping into the carriage and taking his seat. As the carriage begins to move, he realizes his heart feels strangely at peace, perhaps because he had already taken revenge on every one of them in his previous life. He leans back, rests his head, and quietly watches the beautiful scenery passing by outside the carriage window. Ferda feels that the uncontrollable rage and endless thirst for revenge that once consumed him have finally disappeared from his heart. The young man reflects that the red magic fueled by hatred he once relied on had been much like a dangerous drug. At first, it felt incredibly exhilarating, but as his body developed a tolerance, that power gradually slipped beyond his control. That dark force had become a true poison to both his mind and his soul. Whenever the madness consumed him, everything around him felt strangely exciting and euphoric. But now, Ferda knows he no longer wishes to live such a destructive and hollow life. For him, experiencing this sense of peace and quiet after so long is far more comforting than he ever imagined. Suddenly, the journey comes to an end, and the coachman nervously announces that they have finally arrived. A weathered wooden sign standing in the middle of the forest warns that the Duke's territory begins there, and that unauthorized entry is strictly forbidden. The young man steps out of the carriage and calmly sits on top of his suitcase to wait. The coachman quickly drives away, shouting from a distance that he hopes the young master stays safe and healthy. Ferda thinks it is better not to have anyone watching him, though he figures he will have to rely on simple fourth circle spells if any wild beasts appear. Just then, a stronger gust of wind sweeps through the forest, carrying several leaves that immediately catch his attention. Ferda focuses on the woods and notices the mysterious silhouette of a young woman hidden among the trees. Dressed in a maid's uniform, she approaches gracefully and introduces herself as Ruri, the loyal servant of Valdova. She politely asks if he is Ferda Roznova, and the young man calmly confirms his identity. Ruri gestures with her hand, signaling that she will escort him and guide him safely to the castle. The people of the Arkan Empire took great pride in what they believed was their unmatched strength, while refusing to acknowledge the weaknesses of their own nation. Far to the east of the continent lay the dangerous land of demons, a place overrun by monsters that no one could control. Yet it was the fearsome red dragon, Valdrova, who single-handedly stopped the advance of those beasts and protected the entire border. Ferda believes it is unfair that she carries such a terrible reputation, despite creating the only line of defense against that deadly land. As wolves quietly surround them in the forest, he remembers how people constantly spread rumors that she was secretly raising an army of monsters. Yet none of those cowardly liars would ever dare repeat those accusations in front of the mighty dragon herself. Noticing the young man's concern about the beasts surrounding them, Ruri turns toward him and gently tells him not to worry. She casts a light protective spell and assures him that the monsters will not recklessly attack as long as he remains by her side. Ferda asks how much farther they still have to walk, and she calmly replies that it will take about 2 hours. Surprised, he asks how she managed to reach him so quickly. As if it were the most natural thing in the world, Ruri casually explains that if she had been traveling alone and decided to fly, the trip would have taken only 10 seconds. Ferda immediately realizes that just as he had suspected, she is no ordinary maid. Ruri is a high-level dragon spawn, blessed with immense physical strength and natural magic, hiding her horns and tail whenever she is around humans. Knowing this, Ferda firmly plants his wooden staff into the ground with a determined expression. He suggests that they fly to the lair instead, but Ruri asks if that means she would have to carry him in her arms the entire way. The young man confidently says he can manage the flight on his own, but Ruri bluntly replies that she simply has no desire to carry him. The two continue their journey in complete silence along the forest path. After a while, Ferda suggests taking a short break, but she tells him to keep moving because her master is already waiting for his arrival. Ferda lets out a discouraged sigh, realizing he will have to endure the exhausting walk to the very end. As he continues forward, the young man quietly reflects that the road to marriage is never an easy one. After a long trek, the maid finally knocks on the enormous gates of the castle. She loudly announces to her master that his groom has finally arrived. Ferda immediately feels an overwhelming pressure pouring out from inside the castle and is astonished by the dragon's terrifying presence. Ruri tells him to wait outside while she delivers the message, but the young man suggests speaking directly to the Duke instead. The servant glares at him with cold fury and asks if someone of his status truly believes he has the right to meet the Duke in person. A short while later, she returns and announces that she will deliver the Duke Valda's official response. On behalf of her master, the maid congratulates Ferda for making it all the way there despite knowing the dangers involved. However, she soon explains that the Duke has absolutely no desire to continue with a forced engagement. Hearing that he is being told to leave, Ferda is surprised after coming all this way. He realizes that in his previous life, he would have accepted the offer to leave without a second thought. But now, he is a completely different person, and coming to this castle was entirely his own decision. Ferda firmly declares that he has no intention of turning back and sincerely wishes to proceed with the engagement. He calmly asks whether she plans to deliver his answer to her master, forcing the servant to reluctantly agree. Soon afterward, Ruri returns, carrying an enormous and incredibly heavy sack filled with gold coins. She drops it onto the ground and says, "The Duke praises your courage and offers you this wealth should you need it." The servant explains that the money is meant to help him leave this place and start a new life elsewhere. However, Ferda looks at the fortune before him and calmly says that he has no interest whatsoever in wealth or power. Extending his hand, the young man finally reveals the true reason he came. With unwavering determination, he declares that his only wish is to fulfill his engagement to Duke Valdova. Hearing his relentless determination, Ruri closes her eyes and lets out a long sigh of frustration. Suddenly overcome with anger, she tightly clenches her fist and throws a punch through the air. Pointing directly at Ferda, she harshly orders him to leave this place once and for all. Ferda calmly remarks that such a brief response could not possibly have come from the Duke himself. Ruri admits that those words were entirely her own as horns emerge from her head and her fingernails lengthen into sharp claws while she openly threatens him. Ruri unleashes her full monstrous green, magical aura, finally revealing her enormous reptilian tail. The young man struggles to shield himself from the overwhelming pressure, quickly realizing that he is experiencing the terrifying dragon fear. The force throws him to the ground as she angrily declares that mortals like him are nothing but trash, consumed by greed and ambition. Lying on the ground, Ferda finally understands that it was this very arrogance that had destroyed the third prince. Ruri confirms his realization, explaining that the prince only sought the marriage so he could eventually control and dominate the dragon. She complains that he was nothing more than a shameless fool who believed he could hide such obvious greed. The maid steps closer, agreeing that the former groom had indeed been an incredibly arrogant man. Pressing Ferda to the ground with her claws against his chest, she says she sees no difference between him and the prince. She asks whether he he truly wishes to suffer the same tragic and painful fate. Even while trapped in such a dangerous situation, Ferda simply gives her a calm, confident smile. Ruri is caught off guard as the young man begins making a sincere vow, swearing that every word he has spoken is the truth. He assures her that no one forced him to come and that he has no desire for wealth, power, or personal gain. He remembers that in his previous life, the dragon willingly gave up her own heart to save a selfish man like him. Ferda solemnly promises that this time he will stand firmly by her side, loudly declaring that he came to become her groom. He adds that if they are truly going to be married, then she herself should speak to him instead of sending a maid. The servant's fist trembles with rage as she finds the young man's boldness completely disrespectful. She lunges at him with her claws outstretched, furiously shouting for him to stop saying such nonsense. Suddenly, Ruri freezes in midair right before reaching Ferda. She slowly withdraws her attack, steps back reluctantly, and politely asks to be excused for a moment, receiving Ferda's calm approval. Inside the castle, the maid faithfully repeats every bold word spoken by the young man to her master. Bowing respectfully on the floor, she concludes that those were his exact words. Ruri kneels before the towering silhouette of the dragon who holds absolute authority over the territory. Grand Duchess Vald Drova, in her beautiful human form, asks in surprise whether the young man truly said all of that. Curious about such boldness, the red-haired duchess admits that she wants to see what kind of person he really is. Ruri explains that he is incredibly weak and looked as though he would collapse from exhaustion just from walking to the castle. Speaking with clear disdain, the maid suggests throwing him out immediately, only to receive a stern glare from her master. Ruri awkwardly apologizes and reluctantly admits that the young man is actually quite handsome. However, the Duchess calmly says that was not what she asked. Letting out a defeated sigh, the maid finally admits that the young man truly does not seem like an ordinary human. She seriously explains that, as a dragon spawn, it is normally incredibly easy for her to terrify any ordinary mortal. However, the servant reports that Ferda did not show even the slightest trace of fear, despite being exposed to her full terrifying aura. Because of that, she believes the young man is fully capable of looking directly into the Duchess's eyes. Suddenly, Valdova lets out a soft, mysterious laugh that completely catches the maid off guard. Smiling with satisfaction, the Duchess remarks that she finds the young man's attitude quite admirable. She is genuinely pleased to know that there is finally a human capable of meeting her gaze without fear. Delighted by the realization, she says they may finally be able to speak face to face like ordinary people. Ruri quietly repeats the word in astonishment, finding her master's wish to interact normally with someone incredibly unusual. The Duchess warmly confirms her thoughts, while the servant silently accepts her orders without another word. Ruri returns outside and informs Ferda that her lady has decided to move forward with the engagement. She then tells him that she will guide him to the guest room where he will be staying. As he steps into the luxurious room, Ferda is surprised to see that it is far cleaner and better maintained than he had expected. Curious, he asks who is responsible for keeping the castle so spotless. Ruri proudly replies that she is the only person living in the castle besides the dragon. She coldly explains that she is her master's sole servant before referring to Ferda as nothing more than a guest. Ferda finds that choice of words rather strange, but she immediately points out that until the marriage actually takes place, he is simply a guest. Amused, he compares her to an overly protective watchdog before asking when the engagement ceremony will finally be held. Ruri explains that the ceremony will be simple and modest, taking place 1 month later inside the dragon's lair. Ferda listens carefully to every detail the maid explains and calmly accepts the arrangements without objection. The young man quietly reflects on the fact that he has exactly 1 month left before the official wedding day. Standing with her arms crossed, the maid continues watching him with an expression full of suspicion. She warns him that no one is going to hand him anything so easily and that this 1 month period will determine whether he is truly worthy. Pointing directly at him, Ruri declares that within 30 days he must earn a status worthy of becoming the partner of someone as magnificent as her master. Ferda is genuinely surprised to hear that he must prove he deserves to be her groom. Letting out a small sigh, he thinks to himself that getting married is proving to be far more difficult than he ever imagined. He asks whether this condition came from the Duchess herself, but Ruri admits that it was entirely her own decision. She explains that her master is far too kind and willing to forgive anyone, but she has no intention of allowing just anyone to remain in the castle. Ruri firmly insists that despite his frail body, Ferda must prove through his actions that he possesses genuine potential. She warns that if he fails this challenge, he will never be acknowledged acknowledged as a worthy companion for the dragon. Ferda closes his eyes and quietly reflects on the enormous challenge the servant has placed before him. Opening his blue eyes once more, he smiles with quiet satisfaction, thinking that his future bride is fortunate to have such loyal allies by her side. He admires the servant's unwavering loyalty, seeing how she puts her master's safety above everything else and demands nothing less than the best from her future groom. At the same time, however, he bitterly wonders why such devoted allies had not been there during the final moments of his previous life. Ferda accepts the challenge and jokingly asks whether he needs to become the emperor himself, but Ruri replies that it is enough if no one can look down on him. He smiles slightly, finding her answer amusing, because in reality, it means proving potential that surpasses even that of an emperor. With a calm and confident expression, the young man accepts every condition she has given him and says he understands perfectly. Ruri glares at him in frustration, unable to understand why this human remains so calm in the face of danger. She angrily asks whether he thinks dragons are easy to deal with or if he simply has something wrong with his head, but Ferda calmly denies both. He tells her not to worry and confidently promises that within a single month he will prove what he is truly capable of. Ruri watches him suspiciously, wondering where such overwhelming confidence could possibly come from. As night falls over the Grand Duchess's vast castle and the full moon shines across the dark sky, Ferda paces around his room, knowing he truly must prove his worth since he currently possesses no magical abilities at all. He remembers that mages are incredibly rare and that he is the only person who has ever reached the 9th circle, meaning it should be possible to recover everything if he can rediscover that feeling. For every mage, the first circle is the most important stage because it determines the direction of all their mana circuits. The blue circle is formed through calm, stable meditation and is the path followed by the vast majority of mages. In contrast, the red circle is born from intense emotions and hatred, a dangerous path that had nearly driven him insane when he became an archmage in his previous life. He knows that choosing the same path again would allow him to grow far stronger much faster, but he hesitates to repeat that mistake. This time, Ferda decides to follow a different path to ensure he never loses himself again. 1 week passes beneath the clear skies surrounding the castle. Sitting cross-legged on the floor of his room, Ferda begins meditating once more. Concentrating with all his focus, he manages to form a small bluish magical energy between his hands. After letting out a tired sigh, he watches the energy fade away and realizes he has failed once again. He reflects that creating a blue circle normally takes around 3 years, though he believed he could achieve it much faster because he retained all the memories from before time rewound. Realizing that only 3 weeks remain, Ferda is interrupted by Ruri as she enters the room and asks whether he has been preparing himself properly. He calmly replies that he is doing his best, but the servant glances at the food on the table and grumbles that nothing about him seems to have changed so far. Ferda continues eating peacefully and says that everything will work out if he simply keeps trying, leaving the girl silent and visibly irritated. As he finishes his meal, the young man admits to himself that he has made absolutely no progress and needs to find another approach. Suddenly, a powerful tremor shakes the entire room, completely catching him off guard. Ferda asks what caused the violent vibration, and Ruri calmly explains that her master is currently out hunting monsters. The young man finds the hunt rather unusual, but the servant explains that the Duchess personally eliminates the monsters emerging from the eastern lands. Hearing this, Ferda gazes thoughtfully out the window and quietly murmurs Valdedrova's name. He then rises with determination and tells the maid that he wants to witness that battle with his own eyes. Ruri immediately advises against it, prompting the young man to ask why he cannot go. She seriously explains that the mind of an ordinary human could never withstand the sight of such a battle. Ruri even mocks him, saying it would be better not to watch if he does not want to embarrass himself before the engagement ceremony. Ferda firmly slams his hand onto the table and refuses to accept her advice. He declares that witnessing the battle is the duty of the man who intends to become her companion, insisting that he must see everything with his own eyes. Faced with his stubborn determination, Ruri spreads her dragon wings and swiftly soars into the sky while carrying the young man with her. A short time later, they land on a grassy cliff and the maid announces that they have finally reached their destination. Ferda immediately drops to his knees, overwhelmed by nausea from the incredible speed of the journey, which felt almost like teleportation. Holding his stomach, he complains about the unbearable discomfort, but the servant tells him to stop focusing on that and look at the real target instead. She sharply orders him to stand up and look ahead. From the top of the cliff, the two overlook a valley completely shrouded in a dense, dark purple mist. As Ferda focuses his gaze on the abyss below, his eyes widen in complete disbelief. He wonders if that dark valley filled with gigantic monsters is truly the place where Valda Drova is fighting. Deep within the darkness, countless monstrous creatures clash violently in a deafening battle. Suddenly, the enormous red dragon bursts into view, soaring through the center of a massive explosion of flames. Two gigantic serpents immediately lunge toward her with terrifying roars, but the dragon effortlessly tears through the flesh of one of the monsters with her razor-sharp claws. She then viciously bites into the creature's neck as blazing flames begin gathering inside her mouth. The fiery energy rapidly builds within her throat, illuminating the entire battlefield with an intense crimson glow. A devastating breath of fire erupts from the dragon, incinerating everything in its path below. The overwhelming wave of heat and violent wind reaches the top of the cliff, yet Ruri remains perfectly calm and unmoved by the impact. The dragon then unleashes an earth-shaking roar so deafening and intimidating that its sonic force spreads across the entire valley like a massive shockwave. Overwhelmed by the crushing pressure of that terrifying presence, Ferda breaks into a cold sweat and begins trembling uncontrollably. Realizing the unimaginable power possessed by his future bride, he collapses to his knees once again. The overwhelming aura carried within the dragon's roar deeply affects the mind of every human who hears it from such a close distance. Trembling with one hand pressed against his chest, Ferda struggles to catch his breath as Ruri calmly asks whether he finally understands the reality before him. She coldly declares how absurd it is for a mere human to think of standing beside a being as powerful as a dragon. Pointing toward the colossal dragon below, Ruri tells him that this is the true form of the woman who is destined to become Ferda's future companion. The servant mockingly repeats how absurd it is for a mere human to think of forming a bond with such an overwhelmingly powerful dragon. She insists that the massive and destructive creature before him is the very partner he chose to stand beside. Ruri notices the young man's hand pressed against the ground and realizes he is trembling heavily beneath the crushing pressure. She quietly thinks to herself that this reaction is exactly what she expected, proving why she had warned him in the first place. The girl explains that the blood of a red dragon carries what humans call a fierce nature. It is an unstoppable existence that cannot survive without destroying everything in its path and is driven by overwhelming destructive instincts. Ruri says that this violent nature is innate and asks whether he finally understands the constant danger of becoming a dragon's companion. The servant reflects that humans and dragons can never truly stand as equals and believes her master will eventually realize that this engagement is nothing more than a foolish dream. However, Ferda slowly lifts his head with a smile and quietly murmurs that everything before him is truly magnificent, leaving the servant completely speechless. Ruri is stunned to discover that instead of fear, the young man is staring at the dragon with nothing but admiration and awe. She instinctively steps back, horrified, and wonders if the human is actually some kind of hopeless glutton for punishment. Night falls once again over the silent castle as the moon peacefully shines across the star-filled sky. Lying in his bed, Ferda reflects that although he had mentally prepared himself for the overwhelming pressure, the reality had far exceeded his expectations. He feels that his entire body has been completely drained after enduring the full force of the dragon's fear and deafening roar. He remembers being carried back by the maid, who also appeared slightly exhausted after the high-speed journey. Ferda considers it a miracle that his mind remained intact and reminds himself that he cannot afford to waste the entire day without making progress. The young man begins wondering why he chose to witness that dangerous battle in the first place, replaying every breathtaking moment he saw in the valley. Suddenly, a flash of realization strikes him and his eyes widen in surprise. Even though the sight had been terrifying, he realizes that deep down he wants to continue watching his future bride with his own eyes. He reflects on how she conceals her true form while defending the eastern border, relentlessly crushing and tearing apart terrifying monsters. He realizes she endures all of it solely to protect the people and things she treasures most. To Ferda, that unwavering determination is no different from the path of a noble knight who willingly chose a life filled with suffering. Stretching out his arms as a gentle breeze brushes past him, he quietly thinks about how truly magnificent her resolve is. A faint smile appears on the young man's face as he reflects on how incredible it is that someone like her agreed to stand by his side. At that very moment, a powerful crimson energy suddenly begins gathering within his hands, making him realize in shock that it is the red circle. Panic immediately overtakes him as he desperately tries to suppress the energy, knowing he cannot afford to repeat the mistakes of his previous life and must reject that power. But as he looks more closely at the flow of crimson mana, he becomes fascinated by something unexpected hidden within it. The image of the imposing warrior clad in crimson armor resurfaces vividly in his mind. Ferda feels his heart pounding as he focuses entirely on the unforgettable image of Valdrova. He realizes that the more he recalls her battle, the more his mana circuits begin to clear with an emotion that is neither hatred nor revenge. Sitting in meditation, he carefully studies that mysterious feeling before it fades away completely. The young man concentrates on it with everything he has, rapidly compressing and spinning the magical energy between his hands. Maintaining perfect focus, the crimson mana shines brilliantly as it gradually takes shape around his body. Ferda pours all of his determination into creating a single powerful magic circle. At last, he successfully forms the circle and smiles as he realizes that this energy is completely different from what he wielded in the past. With unwavering resolve, the young man promises himself that he will never repeat the mistakes of his previous life. The following morning, Ruri enters the room, and her eyes widen in disbelief as she asks whether he truly activated his mana circuits in a single night. Ferda compliments her sharp perception, while the maid demands to know how he accomplished something that should have been impossible. Wearing a confident smile, he boasts that he succeeded because he is no ordinary person, and asks what she thinks of his remarkable progress. Ruri reluctantly admits that he has met her expectations, but Ferda calmly acknowledges that he still has a long road ahead of him. Folding away his napkin, he maintains a serious expression as he thinks about his next objective. Ferda asks whether there is a suitable place nearby where he can train, and the scene shifts to an open field filled with practice targets. One of the straw dummies has already been set up in the middle of the sandy training ground. Ruri appears carrying a broom and proudly announces that she prepared the entire training area exactly as he requested. Impressed, Ferda applauds her and praises the servant for setting everything up by herself in less than half a day. She finds it odd that he asked for ordinary training dummies instead of expensive equipment. The young man explains that what he truly needs is to improve his control over mana. Confused, Ruri comments that for dragons, controlling magical energy is as natural as breathing. Ferda jokingly replies that most humans would consider that way of thinking completely barbaric, but Ruri proudly reminds him that she is a dragon spawn as well. Ferda quietly looks at her for a moment with a calm, thoughtful expression. He reflects that those born with overwhelming natural power could never truly understand the effort required from ordinary humans. Even so, he invites the servant to watch his simple mana control training. He knows that the foundation of mana control is stability, which is normally achieved through the traditional path of the blue circle. However, the circle he awakened this time is a red circle, making everything completely different. He must stir his emotions while keeping them perfectly under control, because overcoming that contradiction is the key to unlocking his true strength. In his previous life, it took him an entire year just to draw mana from the endless stream of hatred, and another full year to condense it into a single sphere. All of that painful effort had been necessary for him to successfully recreate his mana projectile. However, thanks to all the experience he accumulated in his previous life, he now needs only 2 minutes to create that exact same sphere. Ruri watches in complete shock, wondering how he managed to perfectly control his mana and form such a stable sphere on his very first attempt. Ignoring her astonishment, Ferda effortlessly creates 3 more crimson spheres of energy that float around his hand. He calmly points toward the training targets and gives a single command for the magic spheres to fire. The projectiles shoot forward at incredible speed, slicing through the air while leaving glowing trails of destructive energy behind them. With a thunderous explosion, the mana blasts strike the target dead center and completely obliterate it before the servant's astonished eyes. Satisfied with the result, the young man looks down at his hands and says with a faint smile that it seems he has not lost his talent for magic after all. Ruri remains completely silent, carefully analyzing the flawless display of power she has just witnessed. Later, Ruri meets with Valdrova inside a cave and delivers her report about Ferda's early awakening as a mage. The Grand Duchess admits that she does not fully understand how impressive such a feat is and asks how the young man performed according to the servant's evaluation. Ruri replies that he was absolutely flawless and made not a single mistake, making her believe he is actually dangerous, which immediately sparks her lady's curiosity. She explains that it is impossible for an ordinary human to be so perfect without hiding something. She even wonders if he might simply be some strange man who enjoys pain. Drova finds it amusing that Ruri speaks so highly of a human's abilities, and the servant reluctantly admits that Ferda is indeed full of surprises. The Duchess gently tells her not to worry and says she wants to trust the sincere intentions the young man has shown toward her. Ruri listens with concern, bitterly remembering how deeply humans had wounded her beloved mistress in the past. She silently vows to protect her lady's heart from suffering another disappointment and becomes even more determined to uncover the groom's true intentions. After thinking for a moment, the servant suggests taking this opportunity to entrust Ferda with an important task. Intrigued by the proposal, the Duchess smiles and asks what kind of task she has in mind. Sometime later, Ferda appears dressed elegantly in noble red attire as his arrival is formally announced. Inside the grand meeting hall, the local nobles gather in surprise after being summoned so suddenly by the Grand Duchess. Several lords complain about attending a meeting while monsters continue threatening the territory, but their attention quickly shifts to the arrival of the Duchess's new groom. One of the nobles is stunned that someone actually accepted such a reckless proposal and asks who could possibly be foolish enough to do so. The nobles begin whispering among themselves, mocking him as nothing more than a weak young man who cannot even wield a sword despite his noble lineage. Sitting proudly at the head of the table, an elderly leader laughs at the situation, claiming the young man will not survive for long and that there is nothing to worry about. The influential Count Olivera confidently declares that the groom will surely end up being torn apart by the Duchess herself. Just then, the massive doors slowly swing open as the groom's arrival is officially announced. Carrying himself with calm confidence and graceful composure, Ferda steps into the hall with Ruri walking closely behind him. Before all of that, the young man had been quietly reading in the library when he asked whether it was truly necessary for him to meet the feudal lords. Ruri explained that it was, then asked if he knew why her master carried the prestigious title of Grand Duchess. She recalled that it was Drova herself who had personally slain the fearsome black dragon Godwin in the past. Because of that incredible achievement, she was granted dominion over those lands. However, since her current duty is protecting the region by hunting monsters, her future groom must govern the territory in her place. In other words, while the Duchess handles every external threat, it will be his responsibility to oversee all the internal affairs of the domain. Ferda realizes that this is a test of his leadership abilities and calmly accepts the challenge of presenting himself before the gathered lords. Back in the meeting hall, the young man formally introduces himself as the future companion of the Grand Duchess before addressing the council. Without the slightest hesitation, he sweeps a cold gaze across the room and bluntly asks how they wish to be treated by him. The unexpected question catches every lord by surprise, making them immediately realize that the young man will not be someone they can easily manipulate. The elderly count offers a faint smile and politely replies that everyone present faithfully serves beneath the Grand Duchess's rule. He says it is only proper to show respect to her future groom, but makes it clear that there are certain matters that must first be discussed. Confidently asserting his authority, the old noble reminds everyone that they had pledged their loyalty to the empire long before the young man was even born. He then sarcastically suggests that it should be the groom's responsibility to show proper respect for their many years of experience. Ferda listens to every word in silence before coldly asking whether that is truly their final answer to his question. Raising his sharp, unwavering gaze, he firmly demands that they answer him directly. Pressured by the young man's intimidating presence, the old count nervously swallows and reluctantly admits that it is indeed the groom's right to speak down to them. Ferda then calmly explains that even after the marriage, nothing will fundamentally change, as each territory will continue to remain under the control of its respective lord. Suddenly, one of the nobles slams his fist onto the table and angrily stands up, demanding to know whether the young man is accusing them of exploiting and stealing from their own people. With perfect composure, Ferda raises a hand and sarcastically apologizes, claiming it was merely a slip of the tongue. The furious noble sneers that he now understands exactly why the young man had been cast out by his own family. Pointing directly at him, He mockingly declares that Ferda is nothing more than a failed first circle mage and demands respect, proudly reminding everyone that he himself is a far superior fourth circle mage. Ferda simply murmurs that a fourth circle mage is respectable enough, showing no concern whatsoever over the threat. The noble is instantly consumed by rage and asks through clenched teeth what exactly the young man just said. He loudly declares that fourth circle mages are treated as true authorities and that their status is earned solely through their overwhelming magical ability. Furious at being looked down upon by someone from the first circle, he begins gathering his mana, determined to teach the young man a lesson in respect. As the aggression begins, Ferda calmly extends one hand and says he has an interesting proposal for his opponent. He suggests that to truly test the abilities of a mere first circle mage, they should settle the matter with a duel right there. The scene shifts to a dueling arena where the gathered nobles comment that the outcome of a fight between a first circle and a fourth circle mage is already obvious. Standing silently to one side, Ruri simply watches the situation unfold, while the other nobles wonder whether Thessalos will show any mercy to the young Ferda during the match. A strong breeze sweeps through the vast stone arena as the two opponents take their positions before the assembled audience. With his hands tucked into his pockets and a completely relaxed posture, Ferda calmly asks which spell his opponent plans to use. Thessalos feels insulted by the question and angrily complains that it is incredibly rude to ask something like that before a duel. Smirking with contempt, he mocks Ferda, claiming the young man must already be terrified and generously offering him one final chance to back out. Right then, Thessalos proudly announces that he will finish the battle using the powerful fourth circle spell known as Magic Explosion. The spectators are startled upon hearing the name of the devastating technique and begin whispering among themselves, wondering if the young man will even survive. Ferda remains completely unfazed and calmly says that he will also reveal his own technique, warning that the only spell he knows is Mana Shot. Hearing that he intends to rely on such a basic spell, his opponent bursts into laughter. However, Ferda confidently declares that he has no intention of losing under any circumstances. Making a slight gesture with his fingers, he calmly remarks that despite everything, he possesses an abundance of knowledge. Enraged by such confidence coming from a mere human, Thessalos roars as he begins gathering all of his destructive magical power. A massive glowing transmutation circle immediately forms beneath his feet, preparing to unleash his devastating attack. Ferda notices that his opponent is recklessly stirring his emotions to amplify his power, instantly recognizing him as another user of the red circle. Without wasting another second, Ferda fires 3 crimson mana projectiles that streak across the arena at incredible speed. Thessalos' eyes widen in complete shock as he realizes just how unbelievably fast those attacks are approaching. Maintaining flawless control over every projectile, Ferda coldly declares that the outcome of this battle has already been decided. The crimson beams strike with perfect precision, piercing directly through his opponent's defensive spell. Thessalos falls into despair as he watches his powerful magic collapse before it can even be fully cast. In that instant, he realizes that Ferda's attacks were never meant to strike his body at all. Instead, the young man had deliberately targeted the weak points of the transmutation circle itself, completely shattering it. The resulting shockwave throws Thessalos backward, leaving him unable to believe that such an incredible feat was performed by a mere first circle mage. Overcome with panic, he realizes that destroying an active magic circle is an extraordinarily advanced technique that even he himself is incapable of performing. The defeated opponent falls to one knee, one hand pressed against the arena's stone floor as it trembles beneath the remnants of his shattered mana. Completely drained, he struggles to stay upright, his body shaking as he loses all strength to continue the fight. With his mana floats disrupted, cold sweat covering his face, and every breath growing heavier, Thessalos mutters in disbelief that he has truly lost. Ferda calmly walks toward him with slow, steady steps and quietly asks whether he finally admits defeat. The man looks up with tears in his eyes, unable to find the words to express the humiliation he feels. Instead of hurling insults, he honestly confesses that all he had ever wanted was to become a stronger warrior. Bowing his head to the ground, he formally accepts his complete defeat and declares that he would do anything to obtain true strength. The surrounding nobles whisper among themselves in shock over the fourth circle mage's defeat, but Ruri coldly threatens to tear out the eyes of anyone who dares question Ferda's clean victory. Thessalos respectfully shakes the young man's hand, praising his incredible skill and celebrating that the military power of the East is now in capable hands. Laughing with genuine joy, he says he is happy that someone so strong has acknowledged his worth, even calling his exile from the capital a blessing in disguise. Ferda finds the mention of the capital unusual and asks for the man's name, learning that he is Thessalos Walter. The moment he hears that name, a memory suddenly flashes through Ferda's mind, and he quietly murmurs that he finally remembers who the man is. With a serious expression, he unexpectedly tells Thessalos that in his previous life, he had been his greatest benefactor. Completely confused by the strange statement, the man is interrupted as Ferda gently places a finger against the center of his forehead. Wearing a calm yet focused expression, Ferda quietly whispers the command to fire his mana shot. Thessalos is struck point blank by the devastating blast, the overwhelming force sending him flying backward. The nobles watching the duel freeze in horror, their mouths hanging open at the shocking sight. Thessalos crashes onto the arena floor, motionless and bleeding, while Ferda silently looks down at him with an emotionless gaze. He believes he could not allow the man to live because in the future, Thessalos would bring immense sorrow to his future bride. The entire arena falls into complete silence as Ferda turns away from the fallen noble without the slightest trace of regret. At that moment, every noble present can think of only one name with absolute fear: Ferda. The feudal lords begin trembling as they whisper among themselves, horrified that the young man has just killed a fellow noble. They mutter that the duel had already ended and accuse him of committing a ruthless act before anyone had the chance to intervene. Yet despite their outrage, not a single one of them has the courage to step forward and challenge him. Ferda turns toward the terrified crowd and calmly asks why everyone suddenly looks so tense. He coldly declares that the man deserved his fate and that sparing his life would have only brought suffering to the Duchess, leaving the old Count completely stunned by those words. The Count questions how the young man can make such a claim when it is his very first time meeting Thessalos and the other lords. With an enigmatic smile, Ferda calmly replies that his future bride sincerely wishes for humans to live happy lives. He explains that despite being a dragon, she fights to protect humanity, and that Thessalos' future actions would eventually betray her ideals. Ferda adds that those events have not happened yet, so he cannot prove them now. Leaving the gathered nobles utterly confused, they begin whispering that he must be completely insane for killing someone over a crime that has not even happened. However, Ferda coldly warns that he has no interest in what the rest of them think. Later, a royal carriage races along a dirt road beneath an orange evening sky. Inside, the young man slumps forward, clutching his head in agony as painful groans escape his lips. He complains that his vision is spinning and that he feels unbearably sick. Ferda realizes his mana has been completely exhausted after using such a precise mana shot against his opponent. To make matters worse, the rough carriage ride leaves him battling severe nausea. Quietly wishing for the magical vehicles of the future, he endures the discomfort while Ruri sarcastically remarks, with a glint in her eyes, that eliminating the Duchess's most loyal lord during their very first meeting was certainly a brilliant decision. Ferda asks whether she is referring to Thessalos, and the servant confirms that despite his appearance, he had indeed been one of the Duchess's most loyal followers. Hearing that, Ferda becomes slightly concerned and asked whether the lord had truly been an honest man. Ruri explains that he was only half honest and half corrupt, which already made him one of the better nobles since the rest were an absolute disaster. Even so, Ferda confidently assures her that the engagement will continue as planned because he had every reason to kill Thessalos. Leaning back against the carriage seat, he closes his eyes and carefully sorts through the memories of his previous life regarding that noble. His gaze falls upon the sack containing the defeated lord's head as he searches his memories for every important detail. He recalls that at this exact point in time, Thessalos should have been committing a terrible crime within his own territory. Upon arriving at the late lord's castle, the chief butler respectfully bows and welcomes the Duchess's envoys. The butler politely informs them that his master is currently away, but Ferda calmly replies that the lord is actually dead. Without another word, Ruri tosses the heavy sack straight into the confused butler's arms and casually tells him to hold on to it for the moment. She then orders the servants to hang whatever is inside the sack in a place where everyone entering the castle can clearly see it. As the butler opens the sack, he is overcome with horror after recognizing the severed head of his late master. Ignoring the servant's panic, Ferda and Ruri head straight into Thessalos' luxurious chamber in search of evidence. Ruri reminds him that they must uncover proof of the Lord's corruption, but Ferda casually points out that she had already helped him by retrieving the head from the body. Annoyed by the remark, she threatens to take the head back and call off the engagement altogether. However, before she can say anything else, Ferda calmly announces that he has just discovered a hidden passage beneath the bed. He runs his hands across the wooden floor, searching for a hidden mechanism that might open the secret entrance. Seeing that the young man is taking too long, Ruri steps forward and firmly tells him to move aside. She plants her feet, clenches her fist, and concentrates all of her immense physical strength into a single strike. With one overwhelming punch, she completely shatters the wooden floor, leaving a massive hole in the ground. Dusting off her hands, Ruri casually remarks that the passage is now open for them to enter. The two carefully descend a long, dark stone staircase leading deep into the basement. As they make their way down, Ferda and Ruri instinctively cover their noses, horrified by the overwhelming stench of blood and decay filling the underground chamber. At the bottom, they discover a hidden laboratory packed with surgical equipment and the mutilated corpses of both humans and monsters. This was where Thessalos had secretly conducted his experiments as a follower of the Demon King, practicing forbidden necromancy. Horrified, Ferda notices one of the territory's soldiers chained to the wall and realizes that the Lord had been grafting monster organs onto human bodies. Ruri is consumed by rage as she realizes the madman had practically been begging to be executed. She angrily declares that humans cannot be trusted, but admits that his betrayal fully justified his death. Even so, she turns toward Ferda with a suspicious look and asks how he already knew about a place as well hidden as this. Instead of answering, the young man fixes his bright blue eyes on a stack of documents and quietly murmurs that he has finally found what he was looking for. The papers reveal Thessalos' greatest secret, an unfinished masterpiece detailing a method of infinite mana cultivation. According to the research notes, monsters generate mana endlessly within their bodies. However, that energy is naturally corrupted and cannot normally be used. Thessalos theorized that if this biological process could be artificially replicated, it would become possible to produce an endless supply of pure mana, completely surpassing the limitations imposed by magic circles. In his notes, Thessalos proudly wrote about using an army of undead to destroy the nobles who had exiled him to the dragon's territory. He believed that this research would eventually allow him to become an archmage, while the Ferda of the previous timeline had silently confronted him. Back then, Ferda himself had intended to use this very technique to fuel his own revenge. In the end, the secret method of infinite mana cultivation had once again fallen into his hands in this life. Just as before, he knows that mastering this research would allow him to reach the 8th circle far more quickly, but he pauses in deep thought. Ruri comments that he is just as ambitious as any other human and points out that no one would ever know if he chose to steal the documents. With a hint of sarcasm, she congratulates him on discovering the perfect opportunity to obtain the kind of power humans crave above all else. Thanks for watching. Ferda has finally started changing his fate, but his biggest challenges are still ahead. Will he truly earn the Grand Duchess's trust? Or will his past come back to haunt him? Find out in the next part. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment your thoughts below.